So now we go to the southernmost tip of Europe, and judging by the number of people coming back to Glasgow yesterday, I think the Glaswegians certainly know about Malta. But they must have been coming from a good holiday, because even the clothes they were wearing, I mean, I think I was overdressed in comparison to many of them. Having said that, I know Sally this morning started by speaking about New Zealand, landmass, population, and so on, just to give you an idea of how small we are. The entire Maltese archipelago is 316 square kilometers. That's all. And we are the most densely populated after countries like Singapore, because we have about 1,250 people per square meter. We've got a population of about 360,000. And what is interesting is that according to the last census, the increase in population, which has been dramatic, and it's been an increase of about 40,000 people, has actually been attributed to foreigners who are now living and working in Malta. So that has immediately put a lot of changes onto the dynamics, what is going on in schools. Most of it, as I was telling Nora during the break, is under-researched, but it's certainly something which we need to be looking at. No less because of the language issue, culture, diversity, and so on. So that's by way of background. I'll come back to the title of this presentation, but I want to give you a bit of contextualization of the research, where it's coming from, not just about Malta and what we're all about, but also in particular about the history of early childhood education in Malta, which is something I started dabbling with at the same time I was collecting data for the research I'm going to speak to you about today. We have, I think, a very modest and humble beginning when it comes to early childhood education. We have never had the privilege of, philosophers or psychologists who somehow influenced the area. Early childhood services were available in the mid-19th century, and it was through basically illiterate women setting up in their own home areas to look after children who would otherwise be running on the street. Ironically, and I'll tell you why it's ironic, especially where it was children whose parents wanted to seek or needed to seek employment, and therefore we needed to have places where to keep children. I say ironically because up till 1980, let's call it in our modern history, up till 1980, women who got married had to give up their employment, and it was only in 1981 that the government passed a law where women could continue their work once they got married and once they had children. And in fact, in 1975, the government introduced kindergarten in the state sector. It was introduced for 4-year-olds, and it was gradually extended downwards to 3-year-olds in 1988. So childcare, as it were, I guess, fizzled out somewhere, and it now came into its own again in the last 10 years. But if you look at the history of both kindergarten and childcare, it has always been driven by the need to get more women into the economy in terms of the labor market. And at a seminar I was presenting and organizing back at home in November, one of the questions I have been asking is, we've taken good care of the needs of the adults, but at what cost are these for the children? So where are the children in all this talk that we have about early years, early childhood education? And I think that was one of the so quickly here, you will get the slide. That's just a comparison. We do have what I still call a split system. We've got childcare provision. It's for children under the age of 2 years, 9 months. And kindergarten is now available for children from the years 2 years, 9 till about 5 years. Why? Because you start your formal education, compulsory education. Being a British colony, we still have some of the inheritance and legacy. We start compulsory education in the year a child turns 5. We did have the system in kindergarten when on the day you turned 3, you and your mother could show up on the doorstep with your birthday cake, but that has been discontinued because it was found to be quite disruptive. And we then went through a period where we had staggered intakes. We now have 2 intakes in kindergarten at the beginning of the school year, that is in October, and then again at the end of January, February, we get the second intake. Ironically, people who used to come in after the Easter intake, because they turned 3, let's say in March, April, May, they then started the following October, again, kinder 3-year-olds. And they were already being called, these are the repeaters. So can you imagine starting your life at kindergarten being known as the repeaters? So that has been discontinued. We now have 2 intakes. Government funded, as I said, kindergarten started in 1975. Before that, there was provision in church schools through different religious organizations and also through private, independent, fee-paying schools. Childcare has seen a dramatic increase, especially in the last 10 years. Suffice it to say, when I was collecting data for a different project in August 2016, we had 93 childcare settings. If you had to look at the data as of April 2019, we now have 139 childcare settings. Most of them are privately run. Childcare has become free of charge for parents who are working or studying. And in fact, when we look at childcare in the last 2 decades, it started off like a cottage industry. And to date, you don't really need to have any legal requirements to set up a childcare. So if you've got large enough premises and you want to start keeping children, you can do that. Only if you want to benefit from the free childcare scheme, which means that you are given finances by the government per child per hour, then you have to register. And in fact, this idea of registering your childcare came in 2 steps by 2 different successive administrations. Of course, every administration wants to leave its mark. The first administration in 2007, 2008 had introduced tax rebates for parents using childcare, but only if they were registered childcare. So it was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. If you register your childcare, your parents who make use of the services can get a tax rebate. And in 2014, the notion of free childcare was introduced again for registered childcare where parents study or work. And it has to be said, if it's a 2-parent family, both parents have to be studying or working to benefit from the free childcare. It's age segregated. In kindergarten, it's a 2-year program, whereas in childcare, they're together except for the babies. And they make a big song and dance about it. We keep the babies in a separate room. So that's by way of background. Praxis and policy. We have never had to date an entity, a directorate, specifically responsible for early childhood education or the early years. So whatever goes on in early years for a long time has happened as a top-down effect. What goes on in primary, by extension, happens then in early years or in kindergarten. It is a split system as a result of the way services have emerged and developed. As I said, we started with kindergarten and now we're getting childcare as well. But when kindergarten in the state sector opened, and again, it was initially in one of the political manifestos of the Labour Party that is going to start as a pilot study, lo and behold, overnight a decision was taken, no, let's roll out kindergarten across the entire island. So whereas initially they were thinking of a few settings, immediately 6-to-1 settings had to open. So in June, July, the headmistresses of schools were asking parents whether they would be interested in using kindergarten. October, November, these are opening. And I've seen these letters and documents in the ministry registry. So it's quite fascinating how things start and for whose purposes they're being done. So the governance of kindergarten in 1975, although they were housed in schools, But the education authorities and the Ministry of Education was not responsible. They came under the Ministry of Social Welfare, Labour, Social Policy, what have you, because it was seen as yet another social service and benefit to parents. Even with childcare, until it became, or in the process of becoming formalized, they started by being or coming under the responsibility of the Department of Social Welfare Standards within the Ministry of Social Policy or Family and Solidarity. It was only in 2016, 1st July 2016, that the childcare setups in terms of responsibility for governance regulations came under the Ministry for Education. Teacher training or practitioner training, I'm sorry, we can't call them teachers in kindergarten. They do not have a university qualification. I tried, but sadly, this is part of the history of, coming back and forth. In my previous life, I was a dean of the Faculty of Education. I was the first female dean our university ever had in its 500-year history. So I'm like a museum walking piece. And because I was responsible and still am for the early childhood education program, I introduced a bachelor's degree in education for early years. And we started with practitioners. We offered it as an evening course. And the idea was that once they graduate, they will get a warrant and therefore the same status as our then B.Ed primary teachers or B.Ed secondary teachers. Well, two things happened. Once they graduated, the ministry did not re-employ them in kindergarten, but they were deployed to the primary sector. So that went out the window. And in the meantime, as a faculty, we've taken the step of raising the status, or at least the level of studies, from a bachelor's to a master's level for primary and secondary school teachers. So now we started what we call the MTL, Masters in Teaching and Learning. And that started in October 2016. But the direction we were given at from the ministry when we were about to do this change was for primary and secondary school teachers, yes, start your MTL. For early years, stick to a BA. So again, the message is somehow they are inferior. On top of it all, what is even worse is that with the reiterations of the new Education Act, it is clearly stated that to work in the early year sector, all you need is a qualification at level 4. Now, a bachelor's degree is level 6 within the European qualifications framework. So level 4 is just a diploma. And in fact, what we do have now is most of the practitioners, at least they do have a diploma, it's become compulsory. Okay? So that's just by way of background, which obviously means we have quite a number of challenges. Little research has been conducted in early childhood education in the local context, especially research to have an effect on policy. And despite the widespread availability and accessibility and use made of these earlier settings, to date, there has been a total absence of any evaluation or any research to look at, what effect, what impact have these years of being in early years had on children's immediate long-term development, achievements, and so on. So, or talk about the transitions. So it's like you've got the parents, you've got the children, you've got the practitioners. They themselves separately all are going through their own transitions. We go through our own life journey. Sometimes our paths merge, converge, sometimes we diverge. And this seems to be a very fluid situation. Which brings me to the purposes of the research study and the part I would like to speak to you about. 5 minutes? I haven't started yet, sorry. So I wanted to investigate stakeholders' views about quality in early childhood education. My main area, and here I must thank Aline Wendy, who was our external examiner last month, and she said, we're having this conference if you'd like to go. So by the time she traveled back, I booked, registered, got my accommodation. In the evening, I said, I'm coming. And I'm going to speak to you just about parents and what parents have told me. I wanted to look at parents, children, and practitioners. I ended up having something like 63 interviews with over 450 practitioners. they came in different, forms. Some schools told me, there are the practitioners, go and speak to them. Some said, we have a CPD session, you can use that. Some schools enjoyed it so much, they said, can you come again? Let's do another 2 hours of talking. But I'm going to speak about the parents and how the parents became involved. I also tried to do some observations. And I am very grateful for the fact, and I realized that this was an opportunity where people let me into their lives. I remember it took me 3 weeks going around different schools with information letters, with consent forms, explaining what I would like to do. And some people were hesitant as soon as I said, oh, by the way, apart from your helping me by giving out questionnaires, apart from just participating in one interview, whether it was a focus group, individual, depended on the flexibility of the school, I would like to do observations in your classroom. And this is where I could feel the heckles rising on some people's backs. But after the interviews, I actually went back to start the observations. I'm sorry I ran out of time when it came to seeing everybody. But I had heads of school telling me, come on, they've been waiting for you to come back. And I really appreciate that of the practitioners who wanted me back in their life. So although I collected the data in 2016, 2017, I feel I owe it to them. It's unless I force myself to say, you need to give this presentation, I will be playing around with this data till kingdom come. So what do parents consider as hallmarks of good quality? What are their expectations about children's achievements as a result of attending childcare and kindergarten? And what improvements would they like to see in the settings of their choice? So those are the questions I'm going to focus on today. How are these related to the conference theme? Well, parents' suggestions, concerns, and expectations. How do we address those in the transition years? And what opportunities are there for families and professionals to engage and work collaboratively? And this brings me to me now it's looking like that title doesn't make sense, but I was thinking of transitionless because transitions are happening, but I don't think we are aware of them or we actually acknowledge them. So they seem to be going by and people not realizing the wealth and the potential that we have in not acknowledging these transitions. We do not have official, formal transition policies. Sure, they meet the parents. This was one of the questions I was actually asking the practitioners. When do you get to know your families and the children? And the answer was, we have a meeting at the beginning of the school year. I said, but what happens during that meeting? I think it was Marion who was mentioning it this morning. We tell them about what it is that we're going to do, the topics, what we expect them to provide, and so it is very one-sided. No, if parents want to speak to us about something in particular, they can stay on after or they can make an appointment. And as you'll see with the results, I am fast forwarding now, this idea of communication and collaboration is something which has come true quite a number of responses which parents have given me. So in order to recruit participants, they're random. They are completely anonymous. I wanted to try and tap into all forms of services, church, state, and independent school settings in Malta and Gozo, the smaller island. At the end of it, 50 settings accepted to participate. The size of the settings obviously varied. And the participation within the settings varied. So there were schools, especially where the assistant head, the administration, somebody mentioned leadership and the senior management team, where they took it on board and I said, yes, they have to participate, no doubt about that. And therefore, it could have been a school where there were 24 kindergarten classrooms and all of them were taking part. Other settings, they told me, it's fine by us, this is the senior management team, this is where the sector is, go and speak to the individual people. And within that cohort, there could have been people who said yes or no. So this is why it wasn't like then 100% participation from each setting. And the practitioners who accepted to participate were given questionnaires to give out to the parents. So again, parents were free to answer. So the parents were anonymous to me, although 5 chose to send the replies to the questionnaire by post. Most of them returned it with their children. Some settings put a box at the beginning, at the entrance of the center, so parents could deposit their questionnaire there. And a couple even chose to email their responses to me. So it was quite a valid, fluid approach which we took. And in all, there were 20 state, 10 church, and 4 private settings for kindergarten, and 16 childcare settings, 5 of which came from the state sector and 11 were private. And these do represent actually the percentages and numbers and the divide that we have of the different settings. The questionnaire was a purposely designed questionnaire. It included closed and open-ended questions, background information, parents' relationship with and knowledge about the kindergarten or childcare, and the open-ended questions. And I used in vivo to analyze the responses. I was particularly interested in the open-ended questions because I believe that with the closed questions, you get into the habit of simply ticking and yes or no, it's just going there. And that raises a lot of issues. You were talking about methodology this morning. You want depth or do you want breadth? And how do you get to the individual narrative? And is this applicable to everyone? I sent out 4,186 questionnaires. Schools indicated whether they should be in Maltese or in English. So did that tallying. 1,975 came back, which represents 47%. Is that good? Well, research-wise, it's considered to be okay. I was a bit disappointed until I actually started sitting down to input the data, which is why it's taking me a long time as well. Just in case you haven't realized, sadly, I don't have a team of people working. I'm not doing this on my own, in my spare time. Most of the respondents came from the kindergartens and 20% came from childcare. Most of the questionnaires were answered by mothers and not the fathers. The ones where it's no response, they either left it out or they sent in the anonymous questions. Most came from Malta, 5% came from Gozo. I did traipse across to the island, to the other island. I actually, physically went around with the questionnaires, went back to collect them. I really do believe in this personal contact to try and raise and up the response rate. Okay, so I did ask one question about children's attendance at the time of the study. How long have they been attending the study? And most of them had been attending, the setting for between 1 to 6 months. Of course, that depends on whether they were coming from the childcare settings or kindergarten, the first class of kindergarten. I think the balance is still in favor of starting off at kindergarten rather than childcare, except that with the younger parents, of course, childcare seems to be a regular thing now. Reasons for sending the children. These were some standard formats I gave them. They were asked to identify one reason. Some parents did tick more than one, but overwhelmingly, as you can see, and I marked it out in red, I want my son or daughter to be prepared for school. Now, let's see how that is going to work out. There are 3 questions, the open-ended ones. One of them was aspects which are indicative of quality. And the question I asked parents here was, list 3 aspects which, in your opinion, indicate that this setting of your choice is offering a high-quality service. What you see there is the word cloud, which in vivo allows you to create, which gives you, which high-frequency words were used or repeated. And of course, what stands out in the middle is tfal, which is children in Maltese. Okay, so at least children are foremost in parents' minds. Yeah, you've got school, you've got activities, you've got children. Happy, kids come in again, the staff is mentioned, the teachers are mentioned, and so on. So what were these indicators of quality? Well, with in vivo, you actually pick one answer at a time and the categories start emerging rather than you're predetermining what these categories are. So this is what I made up of this first question. Care and admin characteristics, together with the care, love shown to the children, was something which was mentioned quite frequently by the parents. Relationships and communication, the children's happiness, enthusiasm and eagerness, The characteristics of the setting, the size, the location, the outdoor play areas was also important to them, as well as the variety of activities offered. I am going to dip quickly into some responses. These were some of the characteristics mentioned about carers and practitioners and the administrators as well. The care and love shown to the children, that people are passionate about their work, that they're dedicated, that they're qualified. The staff is kind and respectful. There's a welcoming and approachable atmosphere and attitude. And what is interesting are the two last comments I picked on. Many practitioners are young and therefore more motivated to play with children. But then somebody else said, carers are middle-aged and some are mothers themselves. So, whether you're middle-aged or young, you're still okay you have something to offer, I guess. Relationships and communication, I feel comfortable discussing social issues with carers and the head. The staff is always there to listen. Email correspondence makes it easier. They have a lot of respect for the kids, the continued support from the headmaster, being kept up to date and informed to ensure continuity, encouraged to practice and reinforce things at home. So those are some of the responses. Characteristics of the setting, we mentioned this whole idea of bright, airy, colorful, well-structured and organized routine. The word routine comes in quite often as well. It feels like a second home, open to new ideas, and they are also inclusive towards all backgrounds and nationalities. Parents had some child-related, or what I'm calling child-related or child-focused indicators, and these I further subdivided. First of all, it's the sense of enthusiasm, happiness, and eagerness. I know it was mentioned earlier, and I like particularly the first quotation. My son was given a sense of belonging at the childcare center. Actually, he goes in very happy each morning. He feels he owns the school. So here you get the image of somebody who's really confident and is really there. But children's happiness, every morning my daughter is eager to go to school, my son is enthusiastic. There are photos regularly posted by the teacher which show children who are happy and engaged during the activities. The children's learning and development. Now, again, there were some people who were very specific in identifying what it is that children are learning or what it is that they would want them to learn. But some left it at a very general level. And we're talking about children who are becoming more confident, so there are transitions going on, and parents are realizing that their child is changing. She is making good progress in her verbal skills and first stages of handwriting and tracing. Sometimes, I'm moving backwards now, sometimes she has paint stains, and thus I realize my daughter does participate. Vocabulary has improved substantially. There's also children's individual welfare, which is indicative of good quality from the parent's perspective. Being a small school allows the caregivers to have a close contact with the kids, personalized and loving care. Children feel safe. I like the one before the last. My daughter is continuously getting a positive learning experience as she can communicate this through pretend play with her dolls and also by singing and using positive communication practices, such as, that was the name of the child, brava, which in Maltese is good, very good, and well done. So in their play, the children are repeating and rehearsing the experiences they have had, and that is indicative to parents that something positive is going on. Parents were appreciative of the fact, I'm looking at number 4, they find a compromise with parents on some problems related to the kids, because kids take precedence in every situation. And therefore, this is where parents feel that if they have some difficulty with parenting skills themselves, whatever, it's almost being submissive, but whatever the carers or the kindergarten practitioner is going to tell them, that becomes gospel truth. Academic achievement as an indicator of quality, yes, it was there as well. Parents want to know and want to feel reassured that in math and English and Maltese, it is being introduced, it is being done at kindergarten. They are aware that their children are improving in communication skills. The importance given to the alphabet and numbers is given on a daily basis. So the fact that many of our kindergarten settings, most in fact, are attached to a school that has in a way colored, and because we have a top-down or have had a top-down development, that in a way has affected the program of what goes on in a kindergarten. So this idea of a routine, the breaks, getting ready for school, preparation for grade 1, for primary 1, that is definitely something which is quite evident. Another open-ended question, the improvement required, list 3 aspects where the service can be improved. I'm going to race through these slides. Despite the fact that they're appreciative of, email exchanges, they know that generally in the mornings or in the afternoon, especially in childcare, when you drop off the child or you collect them, you can speak to the practitioner. Not so much in kindergarten. In kindergarten, many of the schools, that's the gate, that's as far as you get. And if you're going to speak to the practitioners, it's either by appointment or on Parents' Day or when we invite you. But people are aware of Facebook, communications, and so on. They still want lots of communication, feedback, relationships. I even had some parents write that they would like to see cameras installed in the settings. Now, whether it's because of safety, security, I know it raises lots of issues. There were a few parents who said that, but I suspect they did say it was because they want to know more about what is going on and how their child is behaving in the setting. Expectations about children's achievements. Preparation for school is still there, but the socialization and interaction, and I think it was Sally who mentioned it, and you reminded me, and I went back to that, and wanting to be assertive, self-confident, develop self-esteem and independence. I was actually surprised at how frequently parents mentioned it. And it was, if I had to look quickly at what they said regarding socialization, they want their children to interact confidently with classmates, to learn to play, to share, that my child learns that she has to love and care for others by sharing emotionally, being happy celebrating other children's birthdays, and material goods, toys, colors, what have you. I would like him to learn how to cooperate well with others and enjoy different activities. And a number of parents also commented it's the cooperation and collaboration not only with other children, but even with their adults. And linked to this, behavior, discipline, and respect and values were other things which parents commented about. In fact, if I had to look at the expectations and summarize, 3 main expectations emerge: personal development, children's academic achievements, and the provisions which the center offers. In the slides you will receive, you will see this in detail. I try to chart the different categories as they are linked to each other. Okay, so this is personal development. They want children to be clever and intelligent. I had one parent writing, I want my child to keep up with the others so they can't lag behind or fall behind. They want children to develop a variety of skills. They want children to be challenged. They want children to develop values. But they also want them to be assertive and confident. That's academic related and what the setting can do. What do we conclude? Well, children's early years experiences are built on relationships. We've heard about relationships and collaboration through a number of sessions during the day. Relationships are built on trust, openness, and dialogue. And it's about participants who respect and value each other. And in fact, in the literature, you do find this idea of the power balance or imbalance. We heard somebody say about parents not wanting to come back to the schools because of their own previous experiences. But this is where the relationships of trust assume that all parties have a worthwhile contribution to make. And my very last slide. Parents, I think on the whole, are appreciative of the work and the services provided. They are keen, eager, and enthusiastic to support their children. They expect their children to be offered learning opportunities to address their holistic development. But if we're talking about collaboration, dialogue, we need to invest not just commitment, but time. And they need to be offered time and alternative possibilities to engage with and share their insights, concerns, and expectations with staff. So transitions as a tool for change, transitions are inevitable, but of course children's and families' transitions and their experiences vary. So dialogue, reflection, and planned action are necessary to address individual needs and to move away from what Van Leer and Van den Broek refer to as unidirectional adaptation discourse. Thank you.